I'll never forget when I was a young teenager and our family got satellite television. And it was such a cool new experience to go from just a few channels to dozens, eventually as it grew into hundreds of channels. To find all kinds of music and, sports and entertainment and news and, TV shows and all this stuff, man, was so great. And as I was looking at the sports channels, one day I found the X Games as they came out. And the X in the X Games stands for extreme sports. These extreme sports took things to whole new levels of not just your regular sports of baseball and football, but man, we want to not just ski, we want to jump out of helicopters and ski down extreme mountains. We don't want to just have bicycle races. We want to, go, getting off the end of canyons, and we want to do all these crazy tricks going down mountainsides and things like that they were going to extremes. And as the sports became more and more extreme, the focus moved off of the sport and onto the individuals, the athletes that were doing it, who could do the next big thing, the new trick, the next level, the next dangerous thing, new and new and new, more and more and more, further and further. It moved away from the sport and onto the athlete. And that's just one of the truths of life, is that when we go to an extreme, the focus is on me. When I go to an extreme, the focus is on me, that it's no longer about the group or the movement or the community. It's all about what I can do. And man, the church struggles with this, and it always has, right? Who can be the best performer? That it's not just about worship corporately. It's, oh man, who's the best singer and player? And it becomes all about them. Or who's the greatest preacher, right? And we celebrate a lot of these preachers that are gifted that way. And we know we all have, most of us at least have our favorite preachers and communicators. I know I do, right? The focus is then on them as individuals, or their favorite writers, or their favorite style of worship. You see, when it's all about the extreme, and we ping pong from one to the other, from hyper conservative to hyper charismatic, and we go back and forth, and these extremes, right? It's all about me and what I want at that point, and how good am I, and where are my attaboys. You see, I even saw a recent documentary advertisement. I haven't seen the documentary yet because I just read the reviews, but it was all about these people, and they were calling themselves demon slayers, that they believed that God had gifted them uniquely to cast out demons, and they began to focus on what we call deliverance ministry, where instead of saying, wow, you have a physical illness that needs treatment by a physician or a medical specialist, maybe even medication or surgery, they say, nope, I'm going to cast that demon of depression or anxiety or whatever, maybe diabetes, broken bones, whatever, that it's a demon, that a spirit that has to be cast out of the person to get their healing. And that's a super big extreme. Now, does Jesus cast out demons? Did the apostles cast out demons? Did the early church have all kinds of beautiful, charismatic, spiritual experiences? You bet. But when we go to the extreme, it's all about me. Do you remember the guy named Simon that came to the apostles and said, hey, I want to buy this ability from you so that I can cast out demons and I can do these supernatural things? He didn't care about Christ and the community and the church. He cared about himself. And the early church wrestled with this too. This is not a new thing just for us. The early church wrestled with this. The Jews were all about saying, man, you got to go to the extreme of following the law of Moses and follow through in physical circumcision. And the Gentiles were saying, no, we can be forgiven of all of our sins, so we should sin more, so God can give us more grace. So let's go to the temples and be part of these festivals with all kinds of physical pleasures and sexual acts. And Paul writes to him in Romans and in other instances in the New Testament where the apostles write that we should not go to these extremes. We should balance it. The famous passage that most of us know from Romans chapter 6 where, they say that. Paul says in Romans chapter 6, what then are we to say? Should we continue in sin in order that grace may abound? By no means. How can we who died to sin go on living in it? And he goes on to say that because we've been baptized with Jesus, in verse 4, he says this, that now we can walk in newness of life. That the idea is that we're meant to live in a new life of balance, not the way the world bounces from extreme to extreme. And in chapter 12, he says this, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice. And he's saying, don't follow the law of Moses' physical demands on diet and circumcision. And don't worry about going to the festivals and the pagan temples and letting go through physical pleasure to be these extremes. No, we submit our bodies to God and say, God, what's the balance? My life is a sacrifice to you. And he says this later. He says, don't conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then he says, you'll know God's perfect will for your life. He brings it to balance. So is there charismatic experiences in the church? You better believe it. In the spirit, man, amazing things. Are there great theological and doctrinal things we need to know? You better believe it. But we bring it to balance. Because when I go to an extreme, it's all about me. It's no longer about others. It's no longer about Christ. So what do we do with this? We look at our own lives and we say, man, God, am I making anything in my life about me more than others? Now, self-care is important. It's all about balance, right? I'm important because I'm valuable. I have authority that God has given me, but I also belong to Christ's body, and I also have responsibility to care about others. It's balance, right? We don't go to the extremes, because when I go to an extreme, it's all about me. So let's ask ourselves, man, is there anything in my life where I'm going to an extreme with? And how do I bring it back to balance? Because when I go to an extreme, it's all about me. Be blessed this week.